Hey, folks, welcome to week 6. This is the week we start talking about the American Voice and not the TV show, okay? Although that's been pretty interesting lately. Uh, what we're really talking about is as a culture, when the country started coming together and how did we begin to express that culture. You have to remember, up to this point, you know, no real mass media. Um, so the spread of culture was very different, and there was still a very regionalized effect. Uh, Going into and even coming out of the Civil War, uh, a lot of people, especially, the South gets the rap for it, but it was true of the North and the New West as well, that the states were the predominant voice over the federal government, and that kind of trickled into the regionalism and the culture of different pockets of America. You had what was going on in Appalachia, you had what was going on up in the Northeast, you had the South, and you had the expanding West, and all four of those different cultures, they really were different cultures. There wasn't a unified American voice yet. And some of this week's readings are going to kind of start to show you how those things tied together. A lot of times today in more modern America, when we start talking about the American voice, what you hear a lot about is the Americanization of Europe after World War II. That's always a big one. Or the Americanization of the Pacific Rim after the Vietnam War. Notice what both of those are tied to? Uh, and they're not so much tied to the conflict as they are the presence of American soldiers. Uh, and especially in the 1940, late 40s, early 50s into the 60s, in particular Germany, but all over Europe, you had Coca-Cola showing up everywhere. Elvis Presley music, even before he went in the army. That's really what people talk about as an American voice. But what I would offer you and would like you to think about is not that segment of the American voice, but to think about how the voice started to form. Um, think about a teenage boy whose voice is starting to crack and change. That's the time period we're talking about. America as a culture was starting to crack, change, grow up, and mature into what we would start to see in the mid 1900s, late 1900s, early 2000s, on into today. And when you're talking about culture and voice in America, there's really a lot of different voices, and I don't want to get too far into analogies with you this week because right now we're 3 minutes into the video, and the YouTube metrics show about 80% of you already quit. So don't want to start philosophizing too much, but there's a lot of different voices that make up the larger voice of America and what was going on. So don't get too segmented as you're doing your work this week. There's only like four articles need to read for the week. Of course, the first one deals with the Hudson River School, which in a simplistic form was a bunch of American artists starting to paint landscapes. And that is like really the third grade version of it, right? But that Hudson River School, that group of painters that came together to start, and it's not like a formal school where they all went and graduated, right? It's more of a school of thought and kind of everybody being on the same page with what art is and what it should look like. That's the first major art movement in United States history. It predated black and white photos of Ansel Adams that were popular in the 50s and came back in office buildings in the 90s. Predates the Harlem Renaissance, predates Andy Warhol, obviously. All those different art movements that we've seen in America since then. This is where it started. And I really want you to focus on what it was in this art and what particular thing about it actually made it a movement and actually made it popular. And then how would that tie through to expressing Americanism to other cultures and other nations. One of the readings you've got this week deals with intellectuals and diplomacy, and it's Ralph Waldo Emerson. I'll be completely frank and honest. I have never enjoyed Emerson. To me, he's a lot like Faulkner. Both of them use a lot of words that don't need to be used to try to impress and attempt to stimulate, but what they really do is alienate. So I won't dwell on that a lot, except Emerson really was one of the first to come out of American intelligentsia, which I know is a bad word to use to this day and time and gets a lot of pushback. But it was when he came through there, the intelligence of the upper crust of America was still admired and sought after and pushed for by people that didn't have it. So, got a reading on the soul of the South, which kind of talks about the myths of Southern manhood through literature and analyzes that literature and how it came forward and kind of help bring on some of the Clark Gable, Gone with the Wind type of stereotypes that are still persistent today. So kind of look through that as well. Real quick before I wrap up, I want to talk about what's actually going on as far as homework that's due this week. We are done with the historiographical annotated bibliographies, right? You guys have been doing a great job knocking those out, keeping them nice, short, brief, and just giving your peers the highlights to help guide their own research. This week it's different. This week it is the bibliography that should accompany, or at least be the core of, the bibliography that comes with your final historiographical essay. The requirements are a little bit different, so I want you to take a look at the rubric. Minimum of 12 secondary sources. Remember, 12 secondary sources. We're not looking at primary sources here, secondary only. There's 7 requirements on the rubric. Take a look at those. If you've got questions, let me know. I think probably the third one, the rationale as to why this particular type of source was chosen, would be critical as part of your bibliography to explain why you're going to be using that. Talk in number 4 about the relationship to other works. You can do that. Shapiro Library or a lot of online databases would offer book reviews that would help you find other books that those are tied to and discuss that part. Remember, you're looking, I'll need you to talk about the argument, the content of the book, what the thesis statement of that book is, what it's trying to clearly lay out for the reader. Describe its content, analyze that, and also how that source is connected to the thesis that you're going to be using or your arguments in your own paper. Always, in a bibliography, you want to talk about any bias or standpoint or a particular position that the author took. So those are some of the big ones that you need to make sure you include, but oftentimes trip people up. So keep that in mind as well. That's the only assignment for the week other than your discussion post. Looking forward to reading all those. Once again, if you got questions, reach out to me, m.caldwell@snu.edu. Did I get that right? m.caldwell@snhu. There you go, .edu. Appreciate it, folks. Enjoy the rest of your week. Talk to you soon.